Good day to you, and thank you for visiting. I am unique in this gathering for a very simple reason. I survived the First World War. I even know that it was the First World War because there was a second. My name is James Pollock, and I was born in Tillicoultry, known to us locals as Tilly. My date of birth was the 3rd of June 1890. My parents were called Hugh and Maggie, and I was the fourth of their 8 children. My father was a dyer. When I was still a toddler, we moved all the way down to Wales. But when I was just 10 years old, our father died and we moved back to Tilly. When I left school, I got an apprenticeship with J and D Peyton, who were textile manufacturers. Life in Tilly was very quiet though. So when I turned 20, I moved to Glasgow and got a job as a drapery warehouse man. At the same time, I enlisted for 2.5 years with the Scottish Rifles, a territorial army unit. By this time, I had the travel bug, and I got a job with Porter and Company, a drapery company based in London. I was based in Paris, believe it or not, but I travelled all over Europe, and I became fluent in many languages. As soon as war broke out in the summer of 1914, I returned to Glasgow and joined the Cameron Highlanders. Because of my time spent with the Scottish Rifles, I was immediately made a Lance Corporal, and by November 1914, I was a corporal. I must say that the extra pay was very useful. We were originally based in Inverness for training, but we soon moved south to Hampshire. Then in May 1915, we were finally sent to France. On the 25th of September, the big push started. This was the first really big British offensive, and it began with the Battle of Loos. 2 days later, on the 27th of September, a huge event in my life took place. I hope you will forgive me if I describe it in a bit of detail. We had been fighting very intensely for 2 days, when at about 12 noon, we found ourselves outnumbered by Germans who were in our trench and forcing us back by throwing grenades at us. Something had to be done. So I asked permission to deal with the situation. I climbed up onto the top of the trench alone and walked along above the Germans, throwing grenades down at them. Needless to say, they turned their guns on me, but I kept throwing bombs till they retreated, and I was wounded in the arm. For my actions, I was awarded the Victoria Cross. I also received a civic reception back in Tillicoultry, and on the 4th of December 1915, I was presented with my medal at Buckingham Palace by the King. For a time I was quite famous. After all of this was over, I was sent to Gales Camp near Troon for officer training. This is where I met Margaret. However, the war was still raging, so I returned to the front, now a lieutenant. I fought at the Somme, Ypres and Arras, and was wounded again, this time in the left eye. At roughly the same time, March 1918, we received the terrible news that my younger brother George had died of wounds received in action in France. It was a relief to my mother and Margaret that as a result of my wound, I was sent to work in the War Office in London in May 1918, and I remained there until September 1919, by which time the war was of course long over. During this time, Margaret and I were married in St Andrew's Church here in Ayr. As I told you when we first met, I survived the war. In the years between the wars, I worked in France for the Ministry of Munitions, then worked in Ayr and London. I became the director of an import company which involved several visits to the USA and Canada. It was clear to us that another war was coming. Sure enough, in 1939, we were once again at war. We moved back to Ayr in 1940, and I joined the Royal Observer Corps as a lieutenant, despite my eye injury. As you know, we came through the Second World War victorious. Margaret and I lived happily in Ayr, and I continued my work as a company director. In November 1957, Margaret died, and 6 months later, on the 10th of May 1958, I too died at Ballochmyle Hospital. Our daughter Clara cared for my medals for the duration of her life. On her death, they were bequeathed to the Highlanders Museum in Fort George. I am buried beside Margaret in Ayr Cemetery. A piper from the Cameron Highlanders played as I was laid to rest.